Certain kinds of real estate are poised to nosedive in value, while several others are going to continue to be strong investments. Now that's unusual. Normally in a recession, all real estate will go down, but this time is truly different. I'm attorney and real estate investor Bob Diamond. Let me break down for you what I see in the market. The real estate that continues to be strong and will continue to do so is residential real estate, both multifamily residential, otherwise known to the common man as apartments, and single family residential, otherwise known as houses. Now, I'll get to the real estate that's nosediving in a minute, but first let's look at the solid opportunities in residential real estate. There are three primary reasons that houses and apartments are holding value and will continue to do so, and will likely continue to even go up from here. First, we have a historically low number of houses for sale, and that is keeping prices up, because if you have less of a supply, you have a higher price. And you can see in this chart from the Federal Reserve, which I pulled, there are approximately 614,000 houses for sale right now. As you can see from the chart, that is a very low number if we look over the history of houses being listed. If we look just over the past 8 years, the average number of houses listed is 928,000 houses for sale at any given time. So today we have a full third less houses for sale than average. That lack of houses for sale supports a higher price for the houses that are available for sale. Now that may seem surprising. What would reduce the houses for sale by a full 1/3? That's a lot. The reason is very simple. It's increased mortgage rates. Mortgage interest rates have jumped from a low of 2.65% in January 2021 to 6.81% today. That's an increase in interest rate of over 2.5 times. So if we translate that to real world numbers, if you have a $300,000 mortgage, at today's rates, the cost would be $750 more per month than that same mortgage would have cost you in January 2021. And that's, by the way, for the exact same 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Rates haven't been this high since August of 2007. And remember that sellers who had a mortgage, even if you took out a mortgage in 2016, 17, 18, 19, etc., they've likely refinanced to a rate below 3% while rates were low. So most people with mortgages today have rates that are less than half of today's going rate. So they're not going to sell their house with a low rate, 2.5 to 3% mortgage, and then buy another house with a mortgage rate that's 2.5 times as high. Many sellers are keeping their homes rather than selling and buying another house. Now, they might put on an addition or redo their kitchen or improve their house to make it a house they like better, but they're not going to sell their house just to upgrade. The mortgage rate difference is keeping the supply of houses way down, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Interest rates are very unlikely to go back to 2 or 3% in the foreseeable future. So existing houses are simply not coming up for sale at the same rates they were coming up to in the past. Now you might ask whether new construction can top up the supply or replace that missing supply. And the answer to that is no, it can't, at least not in the near term. Now there are a couple of reasons for that. First, in many areas, there are very costly barriers to building new houses. There is a lot of local control over house building. The zoning and building regulations basically come from the local township, not state and national. They're really more locally controlled. Existing homeowners really don't want more houses constructed in their area. What they think of with new housing construction is, oh, more traffic, just what I need. It's not terribly exciting for people to support construction in their area, and people generally don't like change anyway. And new housing represents change. So in response to the voters not really wanting construction in their area, the zoning boards are smart and the local politicians are smart. The local governments make it difficult to build properties. They make it difficult to build houses. They make it difficult to build apartment buildings and multifamily residential. They do that by making developing, which involves often zoning and land use planning and certainly permits, expensive and time consuming. And that at least slows down building new houses. Sometimes they make building new properties impractical because it simply is too costly to build. Middle class housing and certainly working class housing is even worse shape. And we'll get into that in a minute because basically construction's got much more expensive. So all of that's going to keep the supply of new housing units down, whether you're talking about single family residential or multifamily residential, which could be anything from a duplex to an apartment building. And that is going to make existing housing more valuable. There's of course talk of statewide regulations forcing local towns to make it easier to build, but legislative solutions, if they come at all, take a lot of time. And remember that local building and construction is very much under local control. So at a minimum, any statewide legal fixes are going to take a long time to come about. New houses are not going to come in to solve the supply of houses problem over the short term. Just to start with, we're about a third short on listed houses. And then you also add on that we're about 12 million short on housing units. If you look at households versus housing units, there's just no quick fix on the horizon. And also to add into this mix to the cost of housing is inflation in the cost to build a house. The materials and labor are simply much more expensive, so any new houses that do come in the market are not coming on at bargain prices. If anything, they're going to come on more expensive than the existing housing, and that's just going to increase the price of the existing housing. So according to the St. Louis Federal Reserve, which is the keeper of a lot of this housing data, the materials that go to build a house, get this, over the past 3 years, they've increased 38%. So according to the Federal Reserve, 38% over 3 years. This is pretty substantial for anybody who's looking to build a house or to buy a house that's constructed. When the materials that go into it cost 38% more, that means the house is going to cost a lot more. And again, that also contributes to the problem where you're just not going to have the working class and middle class housing that you otherwise would have built because it's expensive. You know, it's not just the materials like this chart. We also have the labor that goes into a house. And you know what's coming next. You know what I'm about to say. Labor is way up. And you can see it in this chart. The labor to build a house over that same 3-year time period, it's gone up by 16% and it's still rising. So when you add it all together, a third less houses on the market, the materials that go into building houses up by 38%, construction labor up by 16%, plus long and costly permitting, that is simply a recipe for housing prices step. And the population of the United States continues to increase by about 1.2 million a year. If you add in immigrants, which are about 1 million, and the rest is new births, that is just a recipe for houses to stay high and even to increase more from here. And demand from apartments, otherwise known as multifamily residential in the lingo of the industry, are going to remain strong as long as houses are expensive to buy or build and the population is increasing. So as an investment strategy, houses and apartments are very promising. I feel confident that prices will remain high, rents will remain high, they'll all continue to go up, and there's no sudden crash coming in residential real estate. So go ahead and buy your fix and flip houses, invest in your rental houses and your rental apartments, and kind of ignore the bad national economy. Of course, when you're doing all that, be mindful that real estate is local. In some cities and towns, and certainly some sections of cities and towns, they're experiencing blight and crime and declining values because of local conditions. I would say certainly don't worry about national headwinds ruining residential real estate investing. If there are any winds, I talk about headwinds in investing, which just makes it harder to get forward versus tailwinds. Certainly in residential real estate, it's tailwinds that are moving the market along and increasing its value. But there are two types of real estate that are absolutely nosediving. Those two types are office space and retail space. And this is pretty much true throughout the country. You just start with exceptionally high vacancy rates. You can see it in this chart. Prior to the pandemic, average office vacancy rates were 11.4%. Today, if you look at this chart, today, 16.1%. That's a 41% increase in vacancy. So many people work from home that it's not likely this problem has a quick fix. Let's talk about retail though. And one of the biggest things we see is malls. And that's almost self-explanatory. Online shopping, and certainly also because of the failure of large retailers like Sears, JCPenney, etc., that were anchor tenants. They attract visitors, they're destinations, so people run straight down there. And those haven't failed. Macy's and Nordstrom's haven't failed outright, but they've decreased their footprint, meaning they have less places than they used to have. Our local mall lost its Saks and its Nordstrom, both. And those spaces are just empty. There's no one else that wants space that big. So what happens is when you lose the anchor tenants who bring the traffic, then the secondary retailers start to have a hard time. Those are little stores that you see in there, the places that sell, Build-A-Bear, Bed Bath & Beyond, which simply went out of business because they simply don't have the foot traffic they depend on. Now the foot traffic, meaning people in the mall, are attracted by the anchor, but then they also go shopping in other places. So what we're seeing as a result of that is the revenue of many malls is down 30% or more. So those malls are failing and being foreclosed, and I really don't see much hope for malls. Those properties are going to have to be repurposed for some other use. Maybe as bad as scraping the land clean, meaning just completely removing that building and parking lot, and use it for something that is in demand, which, as per our earlier conversation, would be houses and apartments. That's what's really in high demand. And there's some other things too. Some warehouse space can be in very high demand because when you're shipping things all over the place, like Amazon, they need warehouse space, so that may be there. But I would say essentially, if you trade those unneeded, unwanted properties, such as a mall, into something is needed and wanted, like apartments, then you can see how that's a much better use. Commercial mortgage loans don't really typically have 30-year fixed rates. That's just not what is typical in that market. These have loans that typically reset every 5 years. Now, depending on the loan can be a little more or a little less, but 5 years is typical. And when a commercial building owner who had a loan, say at 5% from 2018, suddenly has a loan that jumps to 9% or higher interest rate in 2023, their monthly interest payments will skyrocket. And a lot of commercial building owners are simply not going to be able to afford that new reset interest rate mortgage. Those buildings are going to end up in foreclosure. So to recap, residential real estate is solid, both apartments and houses. Obviously pick good areas where people are moving into or the population is increasing, but that's a safe space. It's great. But commercial real estate, crisis, and that's only going to get worse. And of course, just the disclaimer, I'm a lawyer, I got to give a disclaimer at the end. The real estate market is absolutely local. And what may be true nationally may not be true for a certain town or section of a town. So always do your local research, seek professional advice from appraisers, real estate agents, and real estate professionals, and study carefully, meaning study the market and the buildings before you invest. Smart investors study a lot, say no a lot, say yes to a few things, and then they do really well. So be a smart investor. Take your time studying, learning, and consulting with people, and then you'll know a good deal when you see it, and then you strike as fast as a cobra. So if you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more real estate tips and trends. Feel free to leave any questions or comments below. If you want me to talk any more about adaptive reuse or any things I talked about, if there's enough interest, I will be happy to go deeper into these subjects. So thanks for watching and see you on the next video.